Hello artists, welcome back to Art at Home with Mrs. Kellogg. Well, it's October and you know what that means. You're right, pumpkins. And in today's lesson, I'm going to teach you how to create a three-dimensional pumpkin using the elements of art, line, shape, and color. So meet me over at my workspace and I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the lesson and the materials you will need. Okay, as I said before, we are going to create a three-dimensional pumpkin using the elements of art, line, shape, and color. The materials you will need paper, and you want to make sure it's thick enough for watercolor. You're going to want to have some pencils, a sharpened, an eraser. I recommend using a Sharpie fine tip marker, and note that the Sharpie marker is permanent. So that means if you put water on top of it, it won't run. A regular marker would run if you're going to put watercolor or water on top of it. So either use this fine tip Sharpie marker or you could use a black crayon if you don't have a fine tip Sharpie marker. So as I said, we're going to be painting today, so you're going to need a paintbrush, watercolors, and I recommend having a cup so you can put your water in it. Make sure you have your art mat down or newspaper so you don't get any paint on your table, and having a few paper towels or napkins would be helpful. So those are the materials that you will need for today's project. And remember, if you don't have watercolors, you can always use crayons. Okay, so now's a great time to pause the video. You can go get your materials and I'll meet you back here. Did you get your materials? Great. Okay, let's get started. So the element of art that we're going to start with first is line, and then we're going to start to draw shapes. I'm going to start with my pencil first. One of the most important things is to make sure you've got your placement set up. And I do that by using guidelines. So this would be about where the top of my pumpkin stem would go, and this is going to be about where the bottom goes. And again, there are guidelines to help me for placement and size. So now this is about where I'm going to start my pumpkin. And as I said before, I'm going to start with line. So I'm going to draw a curved line going this way. And then I'm going to, on the other side, I'm going to do the same thing. So basically drawing a big long oval. Okay, so I want to fit about 3 fingers inside if I can, depending on the size of paper you're using. Now I just want to show you this because what we're doing is we're drawing the front of the pumpkin first, and then we're going to continue adding each line and shape. And we're going to connect those lines and shapes. And that means we're going to start to overlap, which helps our pumpkin look three-dimensional. So I'm going to start from here. And I'm going to go up. Okay, so I'm not going to go all the way down to the bottom of the pumpkin. I'm going to have it go a little shorter there. Then I'm going to start over here. I'm going to do the same thing. So yeah, go all the way down. I try to get these fairly even. And then I'm going to continue on. So I start here. And then I go down there. So see, I'm starting at the top. I'm having the shapes touch. So I start at the top, curve down, and then I tuck it in behind the other shape. And I'm just going to keep going until I feel my pumpkin is wide enough. Okay, so now I have the front of the pumpkin done. Okay, my next step is the stem. Curved line. I've gone past my guideline. I don't really worry about that, but I'm going to get rid of that guideline. And then I'm going to go start here, and I'm thinking wiggly oval. And if this line curves this way, I go to the other side of my oval, and then I'm going to curve the line down. Okay, so now I have the front of my pumpkin done. I've got my stem done. Now I'm going to fill in some shapes behind my pumpkin, and that's really going to help it make it look like it's three-dimensional. So I start from here, a little higher up on that stem, and I come down and then curve it in there. I go behind, curve it down. There you go. And so now I've got my pumpkin looking three-dimensional. And I'm just going to draw what's called a horizon line or a grounding line or a table line. So I draw that line, hop to the other side. Now it's up to you if you want to make it a jack-o'-lantern or a pumpkin. I'm just going to keep mine a pumpkin. Okay, so now my next step is I want to create a shadow. So when I draw a shadow, notice this, it's going to come from the bottom. So I'm going to draw, for mine, I'm having it lighter on this side. So I'm drawing kind of a diagonal line. And then I'm not going to go too high here. So I just want to show you something quickly about shadows. So if I do this, and notice this, if I draw my shadow from one side and I go really high, looks like it has a big nose growing out of it. So when drawing shadows, notice it's going to come from both sides. See, it'll come from both sides of the object, or in this case, the pumpkin. And then I'm going to curve around and just kind of round this off. And I can have it go long, but I want it curved because the pumpkin's round. And then when I shade, I'm going to go shading across, like so. Okay, and I can do that with my permanent marker. Remember, you can always just draw the pumpkin. A shadow is optional. Okay, so I've traced my pumpkin and I want to put some curved lines in the stem. So I just follow. If this line's going that way, I'm going to do one going that way and one going that way. Okay, and I'm going to finish shading in or coloring in with my black Sharpie marker the shadow. And I always like to turn my paper as I'm working. And when I'm doing shadows, so I get a nice even blend with my marker or crayon, whatever art tool I'm using, I do little sections at a time. Makes a nice even shadow. Now it's time to go to color. So what I want to think about when I use color is I'm going to use yellow and orange. Since the shadow is on this side, I want to make sure that it looks like the sun's hitting this side. So that would be lighter, going to a darker color. And by using not just one color, more than one color, the idea of light going to dark is what's really going to get my artwork looking three-dimensional. So one fun thing, even before you start painting, is to have a separate paper and mix some of your colors to see what kind of colors they make. Okay. So now we're going to use watercolor. So have a paper towel handy, because if you get too much water or too much paint, you can always blot the paper, and I'll show you what I mean by that. So what I like to do is have two sides, so I can kind of use my light color on one side and dip my brush in the dark. So when I use watercolor, I need to use water. So that's why they call it watercolor, because the paint won't work unless you have water. So what I like to do is get my brush really wet and actually paint my whole pumpkin with water first. That'll make sure I have enough water on there when I apply the paint, and that'll help me get the paint to move. So I'm going to start with my lighter color and then go darker. So remember, so my brush is really wet, and instead of digging and scooping into the paint, I just pet the paint like it's a newborn kitten or puppy. Okay, just like that. And just start out little by little. Okay, and the watercolor paint is going to run a little bit. Okay, so again, if that happens, you can always blot that down with your paper towel if it's too much. And I like the paper towel because I can test things out. And notice I am curving my brush. See, I'm like making little smile strokes with my brush. And the reason I do that is because the pumpkin's round. So I want to make sure that I'm going to get it. I want to make sure to make it three-dimensional. So if something's round, my art stroke or my brush stroke that I use is always round. You could do the same thing with crayons. Start with yellow and then move into orange. Now it's time to add the orange paint. Okay, so now I've finished the ground, so I decided to mix yellow and green. So this side was lighter. I really wanted to stand out, so I used a darker green. This is a darker orange, so I used a lighter yellow for that to stand out. So that's our lesson on creating a three-dimensional pumpkin. I hope you enjoyed it. And always remember, when you're creating art, to relax, have fun, and keep creating.